Hey folks, Zach Ostrom here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. He's Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald Times. This is Mind Your Banners for October 7th, 2025. Previewing what is very possibly the biggest regular season game in Indiana history, just in terms of pure attention and interest. I don't know, is this bigger than Ohio State last year? For some reason, this feels bigger to me. I don't know why. It's certainly not bigger than like the Purdue game in '67 to go to the Rose Bowl, but I'm talking in terms of like national interest.
What was the atmosphere like for that one? Was it?
It was remarkable given that it was raining.
What about the 1945 team? Was that?
Yeah, I was a high school senior. I wasn't on campus yet, so
fair enough. I think it feels maybe bigger because it feels like Indiana, I mean, maybe this will be proved wrong on Saturday, has closed the gap a little bit. That in terms of I think the national perception has changed of them. Like going into that Ohio State game, I think everybody that you kind of watch these shows or listen to pundits didn't really consider the fluke, right? Like that's what the whole narrative became about Indiana after being they were Cinderella for 10 weeks, and then it's like this is a fraud. And so like,
it turned. I think it's Bill Connolly who said college football hates a usurper, and I think Indiana certainly proved that theory true last year.
Yeah, and Kurt Sugden talked about that a little too, that they just felt that, and that's what it kind of felt like going into the Ohio State game, like they don't belong on the same field, and then obviously things didn't go well. But Oregon game, I don't think that's been the discussion. I think the discussion's been like, does Indiana have a chance? Is this do they have a shot here? To do something, special. I mean, I think the Illinois and Iowa game really kind of, I think, changed things, and we'll see if it kind of can stick here, especially if they would win, obviously it would, but I think keeping it close, I think, somebody predicting a 38-27 score, something like that, and the game is competitive through 4 quarters, I feel like is a change from what happened last year in these big moments.
Right, like, and I want to keep talking about stakes, but like, let's go back to Devil D.
Oh, he loves steaks.
I know. I made steaks this weekend. I know last week Devil D said he thought Indiana would lose to Oregon. Like, is it 38-27 Oregon, where it's 30-27 with 4 minutes left, and Indiana sells out to get a stop on third down, and Oregon scores a touchdown, or is it 38-10 and Indiana scores 17 points in the fourth quarter? Like, those are two very different games, and the final score reflects two very different sort of, the complexion of two very different sort of outcomes. And I want to talk about that in a little bit, but I want to keep talking about the stakes because I think your point is valid, which is that this year, and I think this is important, and this dovetails into things that I think both of us have written this week, is that this year, at least after the Illinois game, of course, there was all the talk about the non-conference schedule, and Indiana was a poster child for that. But listen, go look at the discourse around Penn State's non-conference schedule now. Like, go look at the discourse around, well, who is Texas beaten and so forth. That's like, that is water that is going to find whatever cracks are available to it. Indiana sealed those up when it beat Illinois the way it did. And it feels like since that game, it's almost like Indiana stopped being the usurper. And everyone just recognized that, like, Indiana, at least for the moment, is just new money. And, I guess what I'm trying to say is much more so than at any point last season, I feel like Indiana is just being treated like one of the big dogs. And that's why it feels like that's why this game to me feels
DAWG or
I think it's both. I think it's DOGS, the prestigious dogs, but then DAWGS, the tough dogs. You can get in trouble in that in college sports, in fairness, because you got Butler, you got Georgia. They like to call themselves the dogs. But anyway, we are not going to call the dogs on here. I hear enough of that when I go home and visit my family. But that's why it feels different to me. That's why it feels like bigger in a way, is because it doesn't feel like last year where it's like, we know Ohio State's good. A lot of people think Indiana's bad, or at least, Indiana's not this good. Can Indiana prove it? It just feels like this is a game between two of the best teams, two of the recognized best teams in the country.
Well, then you talk about stakes, like now with Penn State stumbling, it seems to be, you're down to 3 contenders. here in the Big Ten, and in terms of like especially for the Big Ten championship, the playoff, I think there's still discussion to be had. But like, man, if Indiana steals this one, like, how are they not playing?
I mean, at that point they have an open road to Indianapolis.
Right, that's what I'm saying. How
Right?
are
Like,
they
I mean,
not playing?
I mean, basically, honestly, because if you want to look at Oregon's schedule too, and people who, I guess, if you don't know Indiana's schedule, like, off the top of your head, it's fine. That's our job, not yours. But Indiana after this has Michigan State at home, UCLA at home, Maryland on the road, Penn State on the road, Wisconsin at home, and Purdue on the road. Indiana will be favored in all but one of those games. And if Indiana holds the tiebreaker over Oregon, then Indiana can afford to lose one of them and still get to Indianapolis.
And
if Oregon wins this game,
that they're not favored in right now, I mean, that could tilt.
Yeah, definitely. But either way, my point is Indiana still, because Indiana in this hypothetical, Indiana wins this game. Indiana has that one game cushion to go lay an egg at Maryland or to go to Penn State, and Penn State's desperate for the win and they pick it up, and Indiana can still, because Penn State's got 2 conference losses, and neither Oregon nor Indiana plays Ohio State. The winner of this game basically has clear inside track to Indianapolis, because if you look at Oregon's schedule from here, it's at Rutgers, Wisconsin, at Iowa, Minnesota, USC, at Washington. Iowa can be a little bit tricky. Obviously, Washington's both a good team, not a great one, but a good team, and a rivalry game for Oregon. But one way or the other, that is the opportunity here. And again, it's not like last season when it felt like this was sort of cast as the proven contender against the potentially fraudulent upstart. It's just like, these are 2 good football teams. Let's find out which one's better. I mean, I saw I think Parker Fleming, Stats of War on Twitter, I think had this as Oregon 27, Indiana 26.
Well, his win percentage, I think, was almost 55 to 45 or something.
I think it was like 53-47 or 54-46. I mean, it was
very close.
Yes. So, it's just, I mean, and we'll talk about stakes kind of at the end in terms of like what this sort of means, I guess, like really big picture, both this season and like, because somebody asked me, I did like a USAT thing today.
Presuming not even past this season, we're going
like out into the universe of the picture. But I had someone, I had someone, well, we'll save this. Let's talk about the matchup itself. I think it is worth just examining like the excellence that Oregon has put on the field since Dan Lanning became head coach. And thank you, Ken. We will get you to come set up our rigs next time around. Our good friend Ken Bykoff. But Oregon has only lost 1 game under Dan Lanning. Like Oregon was, because Oregon's been around forever, it feels like now. Ken coming with the threats, with the promises, dare I say. I think we forget that, like, Oregon, even when it was competing kind of at a semi-national level under Chip Kelly, there were still some shortcomings that they would paper over with having like elite athletes at a small group of positions and doing something that at the time was very like unconventional schematically in college football. And then there was that period, sort of the Mark Helfrich, Willie Taggart kind of period. And it's really Mario Cristobal that kind of set them on the trajectory of recruiting at just an elite level nationally. And then Dan Lanning has carried that forward to the tune of 1 home loss in 3.5 years as head coach, to the tune of obviously winning the Big Ten. I know they ultimately kind of crash out of the playoff unexpectedly in terms of the way they do against Ohio State, but they stormed through the Big Ten. They beat Ohio State. They beat Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. They look dominant in doing it. Like, this is one of the best programs in the country. And I would argue this is a program operating at an Ohio State level, both in terms of top end talent and also in terms of depth. And with one of, Kurt Cignetti used the word phenom, this week to describe Dan Lanning, which I liked, with certainly one of the, I wouldn't even say rising stars at this point. I would just say stars at the, in coaching at his generation. Like it is an elite program as much as anyone can exist in modern college football.
One thing you did not mention is their unlimited NIL resources, which Chris
I think we all learned our lesson about mentioning.
He's going to come after Mind Your Banners. They'll be Mind Your Ducks from now on.
Indiana's going to win Saturday, but somehow we're going to lose 70-0.
Well, but I think it's an important part, and I think it's interesting because Curt Cignetti did not sort of revisit the comments he made. Not we made for him, that in I think it was April.
Well, you want to talk about stakes? There were no stakes in April, but we saw what the stakes were in September and October.
Well, so he referred to a group of teams with unlimited NIL resources that were scary or scaring the rest of the college football listed. I think it was Oregon, Texas, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Miami, and Texas Tech with their oil money, landman money. And he said they had budgets, upwards in that group of $40 million, a number that would come back when Mike Gundy mentioned Oregon as well, this $40 million number, which is interesting because I think, not that Cignetti was talking to Gundy, but that coaches talk, right? Like that $40 million not pulled out of thin air. And not to say that this is all to attribute their success to that specifically, but I think one thing you hear when you hear coaches talk about Oregon, outside of being well coached and having great offense and that is the depth. And I think that when you have a roster that can go roll two. He mentioned the one example he gave, Cignetti gave on Monday, was that they had 4 guys that they can roll in the interior of the defensive line that are 330 plus. And we don't have that kind of size. We can't match that, right? But like you get that depth, I think, and this is why I asked it. I think it's tied to the fact that they do have more resources than everybody else in the Big Ten, or everybody except maybe Ohio State. But I do think that is a factor that feeds on the fact that they got the right coach, and that they had great infrastructure in place, and now they are not just elite, it seems like they are a juggernaut, right? I think that feeds into it. And I don't think it's discredit, I think the way the Gundy comments came out, the way he talked about it was sort of crediting their success to that. I think it's just fueled their success. It plays a role, but this wouldn't have been possible without all the other stuff, like Dan Lanning being a great coach and Dan Lanning having developed talent.
But it is such a strength now, because that depth that used to be a feature of a lot more elite programs in college football is no longer achievable, even for a lot of your richest programs. Like, that USAT video thing I did, I had to restrain myself from basically saying I've seen Indiana play this game against Ohio State a half dozen times, where they're tough enough and prepared enough and well coached enough to hang in for a while, but you get to the late third, fourth quarter, and Ohio State's running in, backups that would be starters at Indiana, and eventually you just wear down. Like the famous one was, I think it was Tom Allen's first home game. Paris Campbell was Ohio State's star wide receiver that season. Indiana had an All-American middle linebacker, Mike linebacker named Tigre Scales, and he played something like 95% of the snaps, but they had to pull him off the field for a couple plays. And it was the beginning of fourth quarter. Indiana was down 21-20. The minute Ohio State saw Tigre leave the field, they ran Paris Campbell on a simple crossing route. The redshirt freshman Indiana put in to replace him couldn't cover him. Campbell grabbed the ball, turned upfield, touchdown, and that was kind of the beginning of Ohio State pulling away. That's how it would manifest itself, is that, that eventually it would almost be an attritional game in some respects from a depth perspective. And what's been lost across a lot, not all, but a lot of college football, is the ability to, again, if you think back to Nick Saban's Alabama, how often did they send a running back to the NFL in the first 2 rounds, and the guy that replaced him was just, boom, an All-American right away? And everyone knew the next guy would be an All-American too. Same with a defensive tackle, same with a cover corner, same with, a star wide receiver, that there was this depth that the next player in line was going to be an All-American caliber player at the same position basically right away, because that player had been just as good coming out of high school and had waited for a couple years and had redshirted. Maybe they were a redshirt sophomore, but maybe they were a redshirt junior, maybe they were a true junior and they played behind somebody else for a little while. But you could recognize the next cab off the rank at these programs that could stockpile that talent. That's what you can't do anymore. Not necessarily because those programs don't have enough money, but because other programs do have enough money to say, why would you go be the backup at Alabama for 2 years when you can come be the starter at, let's just use Indiana as the example, at Indiana right away? Or maybe you redshirt a year to build up your body, but then you are one of our top 2 receivers. You are one of our top 2 corners. D'Angelo Pond's a great example. Come here and you will play right away. You will showcase your skills right away. By the end of your freshman year, people will know you are one of the best cover corners in all of college football. So why go somewhere else and wait 3 years to get that opportunity when you can have it here today? And by the way, they can pay you for it. And this is where I think, and I don't want to act like I don't want to put words in Dan Lanning's mouth, but if I'm Dan Lanning and I'm using that Mike Gundy comment as fuel.
Yeah.
The thing that I think I'm saying to my team is he thinks you're only here because of the money. You could get the money anywhere, and some of you could get the money and start somewhere else. You all know that you're here because of our culture. Yes, the money is a big part of it. The money helps, but you're here because of our culture and our coaching and because you believe in the vision that we all share for Oregon football. And I think that is what makes Oregon under Dan Lanning distinct in a way. And I think Ryan Day is achieving this at the moment at Ohio State. There are 1 or 2 other programs. I think Kirby Smart, obviously the last couple years haven't really been kind of like Death Star Georgia, like Darth Vader Georgia. But, you think about some of those Georgia teams he had in the early NIL era that did feel that way, where again, everyone was still getting paid, but there was the belief in the process and the coaching and the system and the culture. I think Oregon has that. And when you have all that, it's not just talent that's beating teams. It is, listen, we've talked about it enough with Curt Cignetti that we can't ignore it somewhere else. It's culture that's beating teams. It's mentality that's beating teams. It's coaching that's beating teams. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, I've said this many times, one of Curt Cignetti's great superpowers as a coach is that his teams don't have a lot of letdowns, that far more often than not, if you beat them on your merits.
Right.
Like Dan Lanning's Oregon feels pretty similar. Again, I go back to the only team that's beaten them in Eugene since he took over as head coach was the team that then beat them again in the Pac-12 championship game and played all the way to the national title game. They don't lose games because they are like weak-willed or because they are soft or because they aren't prepared.
Yeah, and what's been surprising to me too is that there's been no drop off in terms of, I think they had a very distinct sort of strategy the last couple of years with the way they went about recruiting a transfer portal quarterback, basically find the most experienced guy out there and talented, obviously, with Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel. And then, Moore wasn't necessarily sort of, he had been an Oregon commit at one time, ended up at UCLA, comes back, waits his turn, and then they don't go after another guy. They kind of identify him, and, he's completed, I think, 74.6% of his passes. I think that's second best in the FBS. 14 touchdowns, 1 interception on 134 attempts. It's just really impressive in terms of being able to kind of roll with him and, not having any sort of significant drop off. They beat Penn State 30-24. I know they had to come back, but on the road, I think that to me is kind of the biggest difference between this team in the last 2 years is where they had a quarterback that had seen everything, kind of like Curtis Rourke, where it was just like, this guy is, and they were even higher because obviously they played in Power 4, but like Dante Moore didn't have that. He kind of struggled, obviously, as a true freshman at UCLA. But they developed him behind the scenes, and he looks really, really sharp. And that makes his team that because they've got the talent everywhere else. So we've kind of said, and maybe the biggest question mark was what Moore looks like, kind of coming out of the gate, like Fernando Mendoza. And he sort of answered all those questions, I think, right away.
But even like I actually, I don't want to say he deserves more credit than Mendoza. I think he deserves a different kind of credit than Mendoza, because like for those who don't know, and you kind of talked about it, Moore was like an elite prospect out of high school. Like there were people that considered him the best quarterback in the class. He went to UCLA. He's from Detroit, but he went to UCLA, and his freshman season, and I can't remember if he redshirted or if this was just his true freshman season, but like 2023, he attempts 213 passes, 1,610 yards passing, 11 touchdowns. It's not like he's playing at UCLA, but he also throws 9 picks and he takes like an eye-popping 25 sacks. And again, we talked about this with Fernando Mendoza too. That can be your offensive line, but if you're taking a sack more than once every 10 dropbacks, that is a quarterback too. Like that is kind of total system failure when it comes to like the synergy of pass protection. And he transfers to Oregon.
Neuheisel calling the plays. So I mean,
He
didn't have Jerry Neuheisel calling the plays.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But he goes to Oregon, where last year he attempts 8 passes. Like he intentionally sits. And as you say, they really develop him. That they give him time, and it's sort of like it's a weird melding, right, of the transfer culture of let's go get a potentially elite QB out of the transfer, but then also like the program culture of, and then let's sit him down for a year and let's really develop him under a really good offensive coordinator. Let's not put too much on him too soon. Of course, Dylan Gabriel obviously gives them that security blanket, but it's a credit to everybody that the program doesn't feel compelled to force anything out of a one-time 5-star quarterback. And the one-time 5-star quarterback is willing to sit for a year, be patient, and say, when it's my turn, I'll be ready. And now, as you talk about,
they had that they had the confidence in them because they didn't go after anybody. I mean, that shows.
No, I mean they bought into it, right? They bought into the idea of, he did what we asked. He's gotten better. There were all these growth points from a season where he probably got overexposed at UCLA to a season where he was totally underexposed in his first year at Oregon. But like they believed he was ready, and obviously justifiably so. I think he's only taken 1 sack this year too. That he got sacked in the Oregon State game. That's it. And I mean, like that's to take 0 sacks and throw 0 interceptions against a Jim Knowles Penn State team. I understand what they did the next week. Like I get that, but the talent is still there. Jim Knowles did not like forget how to coach football overnight. Like there's obviously some more,
and they had to leave from Harrisburg, so I mean like that, I mean obviously kind of throws your whole defensive game plan off. I don't know how even I don't know how, but I mean
29 of 39 for 248 and 3 touchdowns in a whiteout game at like in Happy Valley. There is a lot of like, if there is one single like sort of player story that validates Oregon's culture and Oregon's approach, it feels like it's easy for that to be the quarterback, but like in this case, it really does feel like it's the quarterback. Like Dante Moore validates so much of what
because it's
Dan Lanning sells Oregon football as.
Yeah, it's such a stark departure from what they had success with previously that it does stand out, and it's obviously the most important position on the field, and he's kind of driving the bus. So I mean, like I think it absolutely is at the center of everything kind of for them this season. I mean, on the flip side of it, what do you think? You kind of mentioned that they haven't given up sacks, but they haven't got very many sacks. I don't know what kind of their pressure number looks like. What do you think is the key to that? Is it just trying to muck up the pocket and try to get more pressure than, Indiana didn't generate necessarily a ton against Iowa, but that was more kind of the stylistic kind of offense Iowa ran. Like, what do you think here is the key for Indiana to try to be in this game and compete?
Yeah, we were talking with, and this is a teaser. I know we've mentioned this. It's probably going to be, I think Thursday is when we'll probably publish our podcast with your good friend James Crepia from the Oregonian, who's covered Oregon for the last several years. And at one point I posed James kind of the question of essentially, do you think Dante Moore has seen what Indiana can do schematically from a pass rush standpoint and from a disruptive standpoint? And he said, he pointed out Penn State's got first, second, third round talent on its defense. And I don't think that's unfair. But Indiana and Penn State have both played the same number of games now. Indiana has 16 sacks as a team. Penn State only has 12. Indiana has 10 more tackles for loss than Penn State has. I know some of these numbers are inflated by what happened last weekend, but listen, like it also happened. Indiana opponents are converting less than 24% of their third downs. Penn State opponents are converting 40% of their third downs. Again, I know that the UCLA game inflates that number, but maybe the UCLA game should also, maybe the UCLA game should also inform how we sort of feel about these two teams. And Indiana is allowing a fair bit fewer explosive plays, especially plays of 10 and 20 plus yards, than Penn State is.
Your mic's dead. Your mic's still dead.
There.
Where's Ken?
Where's
Ken?
I accidentally knocked this loose, and I think even when I plugged it back in, it was muted in StreamYard. I don't think
here's a question.
I don't think Indiana. No, let me just complete the thought because I was literally about to finish. I don't think Indiana
your mic cuts you off. Your thought's done. It's over.
I don't think Indiana has maybe the individual talent that Penn State has.
Sure.
But I'm not convinced that Indiana and Dan Lanning actually talked a little bit about Indiana's defense and how disruptive it is, how aggressive it is. I think Indiana has the capacity to create, to use the common nomenclature, the modern nomenclature, a little bit more havoc in the way that it rushes the passer, attacks the line of scrimmage, and tries to disrupt your offense than Penn State did. And I think if you want like a comparison, I think Indiana can, maybe not will, but can do in this game what it did in that Ohio State game last year, where I know we forget how that game was playing out before the two special teams mistakes, but Indiana's defense is more than holding its own. Ohio State is not getting out of first or second gear for a lot of that first half, and it's not until Indiana is starting to take risks and that defense can't get off the field that Ohio State really takes control.
Well, you mentioned the war of attrition kind of type of thing.
Yeah.
What here? What do you think about this? And I've said this a couple of times, I think in various interviews, radio spots, that I think through the first 5 games, Indiana's defense has been more impressive than the offense.
I think that's fair. No, I think that's perfectly fair. And I think it's been like part of that, in fairness, I think is because through these first 5 games, Indiana, I think we have more questions about the defense. And for the drop off to be essentially 0.
Yeah.
While Indiana has been playing a more difficult schedule through its first 5 games this season than it did last season, I think that is what's impressive. Like, we had more questions about where all the pieces fit, who was going to handle the interior, how would Indiana replace Jalen Walker, who's going to take over that second corner spot. Listen, Kurt Cignetti's probably still not happy with the safety play, but guess what? His leading tackler is also his leader in interceptions is a safety.
Right.
And the safeties, for whatever he thinks of them, are producing. My point is, it seemed like if there was going to be regression for Indiana from last year, it was more likely to come on the defensive side of the football. And instead, despite playing, I understand it's still not a great non-conference, but Old Dominion has us thinking this is probably a better non-conference than what Indiana played a year ago.
Could they be a playoff team? But is that the second playoff team they'll have faced, not Penn State?
And then also certainly playing a more difficult start to Big Ten play than what Indiana faced a season ago with UCLA and Maryland.
Right.
The defense has looked just as good, if not slightly better. I don't think the offense has been bad. I think Fernando Mendoza has been really good. Right. No. But it's that the defense seemed like the spot that was ripe for regression, and instead Indiana's just reinvented some things, repurposed some players, and just kind of not lost a step.
Well, it just feels to me like I think the offense outside the Illinois game has had struggles and pronounced sort of just looked flat at times or kind of regressed, Mendoza kind of gets, those bad habits kind of come back. Whereas the defense, you can kind of count 3 plays that are the mistakes. 3, right? The Illinois game, 2 in the ODU game, and then look, they allowed some passing yards against Iowa, but Kurt Cignetti talked about them having to play zone, and this is a good point to bring up that D'Angelo Pons now will be back for the Oregon game, and he didn't play in that game. They only allowed 15 points, and I feel like most of the stuff they did allow was
Let's be clear, they allowed 13 points. I know whatever, but they allowed 13 points.
Yeah,
really.
Indiana allowed 15 points. The defense allowed 13 points.
Yeah.
But what they allowed, I felt like it was directly related to the idea that they couldn't have Pons on the one side playing man. They had to play zone. Iowa found some soft spots, but they still only managed to get what I think was less than 300 yards, 13 points. And it's like, this defense has been just completely consistent throughout these 5 games, beat 2 really good teams. And like you said, answer any questions we had. And the scheme and the focus on creating havoc just works, right? It's a workable blueprint that I think you've seen now with almost a year and a half, is kind of a foundation to their success. And in the same way that, Cignetti's sort of offensive system is, or Cignetti's success with the quarterbacks is. I think it's right there. And I think if they're going to beat Oregon, that's what will do it. I don't think they can just get in a shootout. And,
I think they can win a game like 35-31, but I think it's a game that we come away and say it was colored by how well the defense played field position, maybe a turnover or 2. Like here's a stat that I think spells out Indiana's defensive strength as much as any when you talk about like the way what modern defenses are structured to try and do. Indiana, if you're going by percentages, Indiana's tied for last in the Big Ten in opponent red zone conversions. They have allowed 3 red zone conversions in 3 red zone trips. In 5 games, the opponent has reached the 20-yard line 3 times.
Well,
and 2 of those 3 conversions were field goals.
Illinois didn't run a play on inside the 50, right?
Well, Old Dominion didn't. Illinois did, but it took them like deep into the first half before they did.
Okay, that's right. Yeah,
it was that Illinois didn't until that field goal drive at the end of the first half.
That's right.
The only team that has been more successful at keeping teams out, like Ohio State has allowed 8 red zone attempts through 5 games with no touchdowns and 3 field goals. Indiana, no team in the Big Ten has allowed opponents into the red zone less often than Indiana. And Indiana has allowed 1 red zone touchdown in 5 games. Those are just like, I feel like at some point we have to stop talking about like, isn't it amazing what Indiana football's become? Because that's just what they are right now. Like that is just what they are and what for the foreseeable future they're going to be under Kurt Cignetti. We can talk about what next season looks like next season, but for here and now, this is just what Indiana is. That is an elite number defensively.
Were you only looking at Big Ten? Because that's the top.
Big Ten. Yes, I'm talking about Big Ten.
Well, that's the top nationally.
Okay. Well, so it's even better. And the 2 teams that they're keeping company with in the Big Ten are Oregon and Ohio State. So again, you want to know who the class of the Big Ten is this year? It's Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State. And the other thing that strikes me about this is so much of the way we talk about Indiana's defense, the disruptiveness, the ability to mix man and zone. They don't blitz a lot, but when they do, they're creative with it, all that kind of stuff. So much of that is what we were told Indiana was going to get when Bryant Haynes was hired from James Madison. This is just the identity of the defenses he builds. And he's done it at the Sun Belt level. He's done it at the Big Ten level. We're seeing him do it with players that, last season we saw Indiana do it with a lot of players that were developed at James Madison. When you talk about Mikhail Kamara and James Carpenter and Jalen Walker and Aiden Fisher and D'Angelo Pons. This year, we're seeing it with a mix of transfers. I think that the defensive line transfers have all been in various ways incredibly productive. You talk about, again, like Lewis Moore has been very, very whatever still needs cleaned up in that safeties group. Lewis Moore has been incredibly productive back there. Rylan Gandy was fine in the one game we saw him when he had to step in for D'Angelo Pons. And then also, and I don't think we've talked a lot about this season, and again, maybe this is more of a discussion for down the road, but also we're seeing development. Mario Landino has looked a lot better. Isaiah Jones has looked a lot better. Tyreek Tucker, I know he comes from James Madison, but he comes as a redshirt freshman. So, like, he's still got a lot of room to grow. He has grown a lot in the last 2 years, and that tells you that the scheme is working both at an individual player to player. This is how we take you and your skills and your traits and your strengths, and we make you better when we fit you into the scheme. And then in a broad base, this is how we produce on Saturdays. It's the scheme that's working. This is not like this is not a sort of it's all the players or it's all the plan. It is just a really well coached, well developed group that has, I mean, I would argue like the Notre Dame game's the only one that I think really you feel like Indiana's defense has been that exposed, right? And I mean that that game is colored a little bit by the long run, but really what Indiana can't slow down in that game is Riley Leonard. Like that, like really what Indiana cannot slow down in that game is the quarterback power and the way that Notre Dame is able to sort of just like almost just like paper cut Indiana to death. If you remember how many like second and short and third down conversions and stuff like that, Notre Dame builds that game off of. Indiana doesn't go down 27-3 in a flash. It happens over the period of several sustained drives. That's the only time that I would argue Indiana's defense has looked just kind of like overpowered or outmatched. And even then, let's not act like they got just completely swept away. They could not get the push they needed in a difficult road environment against a team that eventually played for a national championship. Even that Ohio State game, I say, Indiana's defense is more than holding its own in that game. It's not, the dam doesn't start to break until the two special teams mistakes just, kind of totally undercut what
the comments, Kamara. That's it's funny. Yes, I think production wise, sack numbers obviously down, but like if you watch that Iowa game and I had the binoculars and you were kind of watching kind of his snaps, like
you're like Derek Dooley. Here comes Rommel.
Yes, dealing with a lot of double teams, and they are scheming him out of the game, but he's still like if you go to Pro Football Focus, and I know it's not the NWO, but 15 pressures leading the team. His pass rush win rate, easy for you to say.
Nope. Try one more time. Win rate
is 21.3%.
My win rate isn't what it used to be for the record.
It's ranked top 15 among edge rushers in the country. So, and I think part of the reason why those other guys have been so successful is the focus on him. Like Landino leads the team, I think, with 5 sacks. He's second on pressures. They've got 3 other guys with multiple sacks. 4 guys with multiple sacks. Kamara only has 1. But I think it's a part and parcel because he earned the respect. Last year, leading the league, leading the FBS in quarterback pressures. So I do think it's not totally fair. Like, yeah, like would you want to see more sack numbers? You want to see more production? Sure. But he's facing a different kind of look than he did last year. Like teams know who he is and are purposely trying to take him out, but he's still doing a lot to sort of help this defense.
It's a little bit like D'Angelo Pons hasn't had a ton of big moments, and it's just because teams are throwing away from him. It's a little bit like a great cover corner where sometimes silence is reflective of success because the other team is either just saying we are not going to engage. There's no point because only bad can come from it, or they're saying to your point, this is the guy we can't let beat us. I think one of us said that on a podcast earlier this year that there's been a conscious decision made from opponents, from Indiana opponents to just say somebody else is going to beat us. And if you look at it, I know PFF's not the end all be all, but it is a different perspective than just looking at raw numbers. You mentioned like some of his pressures and things. He's still, of Indiana's 3 edge defenders that are listed on PFF, Kamara, Stephen Daly, Kellen Wyatt. He's still the highest graded, like comfortably.
Yeah.
And especially against the pass. Daly and Wyatt have both graded out very well against the run, which isn't a surprise. Indiana's been one of the stingiest run defenses in the country. And actually, I think, you want to talk about as much as it's like, oh, Indiana needs to get to Dante Moore and force some mistakes and all this, I think like the run game is an area where Indiana's been really, really good that I think comes up this weekend, because Oregon can talk about strength and depth. If you're going 3 and out, 4 and out, it doesn't matter how many good running backs you have. Like if you can't give them the ball, it doesn't matter. You don't wear defenses down if they are constantly putting you in 2nd and long and 3rd and long and you're passing the ball and they're getting you off the field. Then your depth is just standing there on the sideline watching. And I think it's like the Indiana's run defense, and again, like let's go back to just these are like the national numbers, and this is reflective, by the way, of what Indiana was a season ago. Indiana was one of the best rush defensive teams in the country a season ago. Indiana's 17th in the country, allowing 88 yards per rush, which is, again, obviously still going to be a little bit reflective of where we are in the schedule. As conference schedules shake out, that will increase a little bit. They've only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns through 5 games. They're only allowing 3.2 yards per carry. Like Indiana has forced teams into disadvantageous situations. Do you want to know how you make a really efficient, accurate passer inefficient? You make him face 3rd and 10, or you make him face 3rd and 11 or 3rd and 12. And do you want to know how you negate a team's athletic strength or athletic advantage or depth advantage? You keep that depth on the sideline. You keep that athleticism on the sideline. And I think if Indiana can consistently get Oregon into disadvantageous 3rd downs, even tweener 3rd downs, even like 3rd and 6 or more, then and force Oregon on a high success rate in low percentage situations, that's where I think Indiana's got a chance to, again, maybe the game ends with a fair few points on the board, but at least some of those points on Indiana's side are created because of short fields or turnovers or mistakes that lead to that make it easier for Indiana's offense.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. How much, what do we got next? We have anything next? We want to go to predictions?
I think Mendoza, I think you have to talk about Fernando Mendoza. Like, I mean, justifiably, these are 2 quarterbacks that, like, it's funny because we began this season with, sorry, I'm trying to draw up the chapters here. We began this season with, this, what was perceived as this elite class of quarterbacks. Arch Manning, Cade Klubnik, Drew Aller, there were 1 or 2 others, Nico Iamavea, this sort of elite class of proven quarterbacks, and each in his own way has really failed to live up to that, that expectation thus far. And both of these quarterbacks that we're talking about here are among the group that has replaced that group. You're talking about 2 quarterbacks that are both in the top 10 in completion percentage, 2 quarterbacks that I think are both, yes, they're both in the top 10. In fact, they're both in the top 6 in quarterback rating. They are among the most efficient quarterbacks. Like, there are only 3 quarterbacks in the country with at least 13 touchdown passes and only 1 interception. These are 2 of them. Ty Simpson at Alabama is the other one. These are 2 of the sort of, maybe we weren't talking about them at the beginning of the season, but we certainly are talking about them now as Heisman candidates, high draft pick candidates, players at the most important position on the field that are among the best in the country. And I'm not picking on anybody else, but it's not like these numbers are because they're not, their teams aren't giving them too much to do. These teams are winning because of their quarterbacks. Like, there's been a lot of talk around Julian Sayin, for example, who's very young at Ohio State. I'm not faulting Ohio State for the way they've handled him, but that maybe Ohio State is able to kind of bring Sayin along slowly, expand slowly what they ask him to do. No, these 2 teams have said to both these quarterbacks from very early on in this season, we go as you go. And Dante Moore is getting a lot of justified press for this. So is Fernando Mendoza. It's interesting to me, and I don't think this somehow, I mean, maybe it will. I guess I would be surprised, but it was funny to me when I did that USAT thing, the USA Today thing earlier today. They asked us about both quarterbacks, and I said, Fernando Mendoza's got a leg up on a lot of his teammates. He's played Oregon before. He's played at Oregon before. It did not go well, Cal lost 63-19, but he's familiar with what it looks like in a way that most of his teammates aren't. I think I don't want to say it's a coming out game for Mendoza because I don't think he needs one. I think he's already had that. He was already a known quantity coming into the season.
People are anointed the Heisman 3 weeks ago, so it's like
right,
yeah,
exactly.
It's like hard to say it
like
that.
I do think if we are looking for, and maybe this is kind of a joint conversation about Mendoza plus the way Indiana's offensive line has either improved or not. Kurt Cignetti got the question this week about the line of scrimmage, and he said, "Well, I didn't think we won the position battle anywhere against Ohio State or Notre Dame." I'm sorry, it was most pronounced at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, he's trying to change his tune on that because his answers have gotten kind of. He threw the offensive line in the bus at the time, in the immediate aftermath, and the punter. But it's now become this sort of like he's sort of every time he gets the question now he kind of takes it like, well, a couple position played bad. Now it's every position. I mean, it's
yeah,
I don't know if
but
change the tune.
For me with Mendoza, we've talked a lot about the individual strengths and skills and development and all that. But for me with Fernando Mendoza, the question is the difference for Indiana, if Indiana was going to go up a level this year, the difference for Indiana was going to be some combination of a better offensive line and if not a better quarterback, then maybe at least a less limited one because of what we eventually find out about Curtis Rourke with the knee, what we could see over the back half of last season with the thumb. He had some good games with the thumb, but I remember there was also a picture, I think, from the Purdue game where you could see his thumb was still incredibly swollen. This is the kind of game where that needs to show up. And Indiana doesn't even necessarily need to win. Like, Indiana doesn't need to win this game for that to be somehow sort of proven out that Indiana's better on the offensive line and that can lead to better quarterback play on the biggest stage. But I think that is where I watch Fernando Mendoza and I say he was excellent against Illinois. I think he even earned some real points for what he does at Iowa. But here, one of the gaps that really needed to close was Indiana's ability to give its quarterback the platform to perform at a high level on the biggest stage, and for that quarterback to stand on that platform and perform the way his team needed him to. This is Mendoza. This is essentially one of two chances Mendoza gets to do that in the regular season.
Well, I think,
and I am curious to see how he comes through.
When Mendoza has struggled, the offensive line's not played great, right? They've had some bad moments, and then Mendoza sort of immediately kind of defaults to some of the and Kurt's
some of the Cal stuff,
the bad habits, and so, but that at some point has to stop, right? Like at some point you have to sort of the progression has to stay, and you can't sort of see the past when you know if Bray Lynch gives up a sack on the first drive, that can't define the next quarter and a half, right? Like it can't be that way, especially against good teams, because then you'll be out of the game by then. So like I think for me with Mendoza is like he can't, like, the pressure, even if the offensive line does not have a great game, if Mendoza has moments to make plays, he's got to be able to make them, because like he's good enough. Like we've seen the throws with pressure in his face, we've seen it, but he does kind of get in a shot like that Iowa game, like the first half did not look great, right? Like it was not good. And you know, offensive line contributed to that, and their scheme, you know, we should say, like Iowa was selling out and blitzing a lot to sort of disrupt what Indiana was trying to do. But so I think
Iowa dies by that sword. I mean, like that's and then
they lost.
That's how Indiana eventually wins the game. So yeah.
But my point is more just that Mendoza can't keep seeing the ghosts of Cal, and he's got to, with in these moments, like you mentioned, Oregon, Penn State, like can't go back, right? Can't be like lost, can't go back.
And what I wonder sometimes in games like this is where does Oregon see Iowa sell out, as you say? And does Oregon see Iowa get ultra aggressive at the line of scrimmage and say it didn't work for them, but on another day it might have, and we've got better players, we've got better athletes, we've got more depth, so maybe we'll do that, and we'll take that risk. And listen, if Indiana fires off one or two early touchdowns because they beat us in single coverage, we can back off. but we test their ability to do that against a better defense early? Or does Oregon say, we don't have to do that? Because that's a lot of coaches will do that. A lot of coaches will say, no, we don't have to take that risk. We do what we do. But then maybe that helps Indiana a little bit because Indiana's not facing a bunch of zero pressures. Indiana's not facing a bunch of plus one blitzes.
I think the way Kurt Signay described it was when he's mentioned this kind of phrase a couple of times this year, we put a lot of bad things on tape. And so like, that's what you're talking about, right? Like when they couldn't handle the blitz at times, or when the secondary couldn't get lined up and communicate at times, those are the things he's talking about, right? Like you give teams openings to be like, man, if we just did this and we got the better players, we're gonna win this game, or we're gonna win nine times out of 10 in that situation, because these bad looks, like this is where they fall apart. And so that's why I think Kurt Signetti's talked about a couple times this year being very upset, even though the scoreboard obviously has not been upsetting, that like, look, these are the moments that come back to haunt you later, because now Oregon has a blueprint if they want to use it of what we're capable of blocking or defending. And so I think those two are where he's used it in the context of the safeties, kind of the problems they had, and the offensive line.
But sometimes also a team needs to see its weaknesses to improve from them, right? Like sometimes, that's like that.
Sure, yes, that's the ultimate hope.
Better over the,
Kirk Signetti did not sound. That was not the way Kirk Signetti framed that. He would rather not have those.
I get that, but no coach is going to be like, "Man, we looked bad. I can't wait to look better later in the year." Every coach in the history of football is going to have the urgency of, if you don't get this fixed, we're all doomed. Like that's the football coach mentality.
But a team could have limitations, and because I do think when you're looking at the offensive line right now, the right side has struggled. Right. And so like, if that's what you put on tape consistently, like, and maybe you can't get better, or maybe there is a lower ceiling than you thought, or like the safeties, like we talked about the communication, like they don't have any backups, right? All they've got is what they've got. And so like, if
that's another reason why you need some of these 3, 4, 5 and outs. You need some quick drives.
Right. But my point is that if like those are your limitations, like, and there is a lower ceiling than you would have liked, then there's not much you can do about it, right? Like, that's what you've got. There's no changes you could make, especially at safety, where there's no backup that can come in that would maybe fix issues that the coaches have been kind of upset about. Less so against Iowa, but I'm just saying, like, yes, the hope is that you learn from those and get better. But like I said, he did sound concerned about some of the things in those two areas.
No doubt. The question is basically just, and this is an answer he'll never share with full honesty with anyone in public, is, does he think they can get fixed?
Right.
Because like, if you're a coach and you think they can, then you're not gonna be like, oh, don't worry, it's gonna be fine. And if you're a coach and you think they can't, you're not gonna be like, yep, that's it. They're like, everyone should attack us right here. Right here is where we are vulnerable. It's just like, and that is what makes, and maybe this is a natural place to wrap this up, unless you've got other business. But just to kind of wrap with some final thoughts, that is what makes games like this so valuable, and really, especially in the playoff era, where you can lose this game if you're Indiana. I would argue you can even lose this game 41-20, and still be comfortably in the playoff conversation, because there are 12 teams, and 2 of the conferences are going to dominate, the conversation and the competition, and you're in one of them. And you've already got quality wins, and you're going to have opportunities for some more. And so, like, that is what makes games like this used to be elimination games. Now they are find out games that sort of say, like, exactly where is this team's ceiling? Exactly where.
But to your point, Indiana played well enough in the first 5 games, so it's not an elimination game. It could have been. If they lose that Iowa game, it might have been. Or they lose that Illinois game, it might have been. What we've talked about the last couple of weeks. They've taken that pressure, and now they can go and make it a prove-it game, and they can play, I think, a little freer without that on their back, that they don't have that.
And that is like the last, like that is the one narrative piece that fascinates me. And I know I've talked about it here before, so I won't go crazy with it again. And it's something I'm going to write a little bit later in the week too, is, the pressure was on Indiana at Ohio State last year. The pressure was on Indiana against Michigan. The pressure's on everybody when you're in the playoff. Like there's no low pressure playoff game, right? Indiana can go lose this game, and as long as they don't just as long as they don't get Illinois level embarrassed, nobody's going to think that differently about them. Now, they might drop a spot or two in the rankings, but nobody's going to think that differently about them on Sunday.
No.
So this is a first in Curt Cignetti's tenure that Indiana is playing a game of any meaning without a ton of pressure.
Or downside or negative, like there's no, like the fallout can't really hurt them, basically.
And sometimes, I mean, listen, sometimes that can be a problem, right? Like sometimes that can cause you to lose a little bit of that edge, a little bit of that urgency. But sometimes that can also let you go out there. I think Indiana was this way a little bit in the COVID year in that Ohio State game, and they lose that game, but they wind up losing it. It's one of the games of the year in the regular season. They lose it 42-35. They gain a ton of credit for it. And in a playoff world, that would have been almost like a successful loss, because it would have been, okay, is this team for real? Well, look at, they just went to Columbus and gave Ohio State everything it could handle. And I think Indiana did that in part because Indiana did play a little bit loose and a little bit free. I think we both predicted this game as a loss in the preseason. Have you seen anything that changes your opinion?
I still think Oregon edges it out. I think it's going to be a close game. I think I don't know. I had 24-20 Oregon winning, but I thought it was 34-20. So maybe I did a typo. But I thought, around, like we said, kind of talked about how the game unfolds. That's a close game, but Oregon maybe wins by 2 possessions or double digits, and that's kind of how I see it now. I do think that they should be in this one, and like, it wouldn't surprise me, 55-45, we talked about that win probability. That feels sort of right now, like that feels where this game is. But Oregon is the 55. And so that's kind of where I feel like, 31-20, 34-20, somewhere around there, but that touchdown late. It's not like 34-7 and like the Notre Dame game where they scored 2 touchdowns in the last like 8 minutes or whatever to even the score. It's more of a game that Oregon closes out with the to push it.
I had 34-19 Oregon, and the reason I picked 19 was because I imagined a world where maybe Indiana gets held to a bunch of field goals that it regrets not turning into touchdowns, or it has to go for 2 at some point to feel like it's got to bridge a certain gap, and it doesn't get it. Like Indiana winds up with one of those weird scores where they're never really out of the game. But the other team is dictating how they're playing and how they're scoring consistently enough that they just can't really kind of get a foothold and really threaten. I could see a world where this is a 1-score game. I don't have trouble with that because I do think Indiana's better offensively than it was a season ago in a lot of respects, particularly in the ground game. And listen, Oregon is a really tough defense. I think, if I'm Curt Cignetti, I suspect that one of the reasons he mentions the size of Oregon's interior line is Oregon, like Iowa, does not allow a lot of long rush plays. They've allowed 10 rushes of 10 plus yards, 2 of 20 plus yards, and 1 of 30, 40, 50. So they must have allowed just one like really, really long run because they've got 1 of 70, 60, 50, 40, 30 plus allowed this season. I don't think that Indiana gets to just pop off big run after big run on this team, but I think Indiana can flip some fields. I think Fernando Mendoza will make at least a few really, really good throws. But again, like Oregon at Autzen under Dan Lanning, I mean, it just now. I guess if you want one bit of hope, and I'm throwing a couple of predictions up here while we finish up, and if anybody's got others, throw them in there. If you want one bit of hope, the one game that Dan Lanning has lost at home as Oregon head coach, and admittedly it was in his first season, if I'm not mistaken. I'm almost certain it was. Maybe his second. I think it was his first. Was to a team with a pretty similar profile, right? An experienced playmaking quarterback, an offense-minded head coach who had a really good staff that he'd been with for a while, at least a fair few of them. That was, I think it's fair to say with the benefit of hindsight, taking a talented group and probably coaching it and scheming it beyond what most coaches, what most staffs, getting more out of that roster than what most would have. And I'm talking about Washington under Kalen DeBoer and the Michael Penix I guess that actually would have been, I believe, Dan Lanning's second season because it was the last year of the Pac-12 when Washington goes to the national title game. The point is there are some pretty distinct similarities between that Washington team and this Indiana team. But on the other hand, that's the Pac-12. That's a rivalry game. Travels is not quite as much of a concern and so forth. I stick by, I don't think anybody walks away from this thinking Indiana doesn't belong in a game like this. But I also think Oregon wins, and I wouldn't be shocked if in the end, maybe because of a late score, maybe because of just sort of the dam breaking, Oregon wins by a couple scores.
Yeah, I think we're aligned in that. Pretty.
You what?
Yeah,
You broke up there. You broke up there for just a second.
No,
I was afraid I'd lost you.
It's the direction of my mic. It's not right. I got to get.
That's right. We got to just put it behind you. Put the microphone behind you. That's what Ken wants us to do. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. We will both be, as you would expect, at Big Ten Basketball Media Days up in Chicago later this week. As I teased earlier, we will also have that Oregon directed podcast with James Crepia later in the week. Mike and I were both in on that. Didn't get any of Mike and James's old war stories. Unfortunately, we'll save that for an off-season podcast.
We could off-season. Whoa, we could do it when the Indy that's
true. We could be making new war stories by then.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what? I-69 is far too smooth of a road for war stories. Let me tell you about the war stories of when it was State Road 37 and it would freeze in the winter. But for now, he's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. Mike will be in Eugene this weekend. I will be helping from home, but we will have so much of your post-game content as you would expect after this game. For now, thank you so much for everyone who has been watching on the live stream. Thank you so much, everyone who's been listening to this as a podcast. We will be back next week for the Indianapolis Star, for the Bloomington Herald Times. I'm Zach Osterman. He's Mike Niziolek. We'll talk to you soon.